The moment Officer Daniel Reeves snapped the handcuffs around the woman's wrists, he thought the situation was over. In reality, it was just beginning. Naomi Carter stood silently on the wide stone steps outside the Federal Records Annex in downtown Washington, D.C. Her expression calm despite the dozens of eyes fixed on her. Rain drifted from a gray March sky, turning the sidewalks slick and reflective beneath the glow of government building lights. Around them, people slowed their pace. Some stopped completely. A few raised their phones. Reeves straightened his uniform and looked at Naomi with the confidence of a man convinced he was in control. "You were told to leave the property," he said loudly enough for the growing crowd to hear. "Now you're being detained for trespassing." Naomi met his eyes without anger, without fear. "I belong here," she replied. Her voice was steady, almost gentle. The answer irritated him more than resistance would have. He had expected excuses, apologies, maybe even panic. Instead, she stood there in a dark navy coat, rain collecting on her shoulders, as if she knew something he didn't. Reeves glanced toward the massive federal building behind them. Security cameras watched from every corner. Government employees crossed the plaza carrying coffee cups and umbrellas. Everything looked ordinary. Yet something about the woman made him uneasy. "You people always say that," he muttered. Naomi didn't respond. She simply looked toward the street for a brief second before returning her gaze to him. It was such a small movement that nobody else noticed. Reeves noticed. "Expecting someone?" he asked with a smirk. Naomi paused. "I'm waiting for the truth to arrive." A few people exchanged confused looks. Reeves laughed under his breath. "That's not how today works." The rain intensified. Water rolled down the marble steps. Somewhere in the distance, a siren echoed through the city. Naomi remained still. Her composure seemed impossible under the circumstances. Imagine standing there, surrounded by strangers, accused of something you didn't do, while everyone assumes the person with the badge must be right. Most people would have argued. Most people would have tried to explain themselves. Naomi didn't either. She simply waited. That patience bothered Reeves more with every passing second. He reached for the small leather bag hanging from her shoulder. "What's in there?" Naomi's eyes narrowed slightly. "Documents." "For who?" "Someone important." Reeves shook his head. "Everybody says that too." He handed the bag to another officer and turned back toward the crowd. "Nothing to see here, folks." But there was something to see. Because across town, inside a secure conference room on the 7th floor of an FBI field office, a meeting had stopped unexpectedly. An empty chair sat at the end of a polished table. A senior agent checked his watch. Another looked toward the door. The person they had been waiting for was late. Very late. Back on the steps, Naomi lifted her face toward the rain. Her expression never changed. Then, far down the street, barely visible through the gray morning haze, a line of black SUVs turned the corner and accelerated toward the federal complex. Naomi saw them first, and for the first time all morning, she smiled. The smile lasted only a second, but it changed everything. Naomi Carter watched the convoy approach through sheets of rain, while Officer Daniel Reeves remained focused on the crowd gathering around the steps. The black sport utility vehicles moved with purpose, their headlights cutting through the gray morning like silent warnings. At first, nobody paid attention. Washington was full of government vehicles. They were part of the scenery. But these were different. They did not slow as they entered the Federal Plaza. They did not search for parking. They drove straight toward the entrance and stopped in a precise line, less than 30 feet from where Naomi stood. The crowd grew quiet. Reeves frowned. The confidence that had carried him through the morning flickered slightly. One by one, the vehicle doors opened. Men and women in dark jackets stepped out and moved quickly through the rain. Their expressions were focused, professional, unmistakably federal. Naomi lowered her eyes for a moment, as if she had finally reached the end of a very long journey. Reeves adjusted his posture and walked forward. He was still determined to maintain control of the situation. After all, he believed he had followed procedure. He believed he was the authority standing between order and disorder. Then a tall man emerged from the lead vehicle. His name was Marcus Hale. His dark overcoat moved in the wind as he climbed the steps. His attention locked immediately onto Naomi. Not the officers, not the crowd, not the security guards watching nervously through the glass doors. Naomi. Agent Hale stopped directly in front of her. The rain rolled from his shoulders as he studied the handcuffs around her wrists. For several seconds, nobody spoke. The silence felt heavier than the storm clouds hanging above the city. Finally, he looked toward Reeves. What happened here? His voice was calm enough to make people nervous. Reeves cleared his throat. This woman was detained for trespassing on federal property. Agent Hale looked back at Naomi. Trespassing? Naomi nodded slightly. That is what they called it. Something shifted in Hale's expression. Not anger. Not surprise. Something colder. The kind of disappointment that comes from seeing exactly what you expected to find. Around them, federal employees had begun gathering near the windows. Security personnel exchanged uneasy glances. Even the crowd sensed the atmosphere changing. Reeves suddenly became aware that nobody was looking at Naomi anymore. They were looking at him. Sir, Reeves said carefully, if there is a misunderstanding, we can clear it up. Agent Hale did not answer immediately. Instead, he extended his hand toward Naomi. She reached into her coat pocket as far as the restraints allowed and removed a small identification holder. Hale opened it and briefly displayed the credentials inside. Reeves could not see the details from where he stood, but the reaction from the agents surrounding him was immediate. Several exchanged looks. One agent exhaled slowly. Another shook her head in disbelief. Hale closed the credential holder and returned it to Naomi. Then he turned toward Reeves once more. Officer, he said quietly, do you have any idea who you placed in handcuffs this morning? For the first time since the arrest, Daniel Reeves did not have an answer. The question hung in the air like the storm itself. Daniel Reeves felt dozens of eyes settle on him as he searched for an answer that refused to come. He looked from Agent Marcus Hale to Naomi Carter and back again. The confidence that had carried him through the morning was beginning to crack. Around the plaza, nobody moved. The rain continued falling, tapping softly against stone steps, parked vehicles, and dark umbrellas. Even the city noise seemed distant now. Reeves swallowed. No, sir, he admitted. Agent Hale studied him for a long moment. That is obvious. Naomi remained silent. She did not look satisfied. She did not look angry. If anything, she appeared tired. Tired in the way someone looks after carrying a burden for far too long. Hale glanced toward the leather bag that another officer still held. Bring me her property. The officer obeyed immediately. Within seconds, the bag was returned to Naomi. She accepted it carefully and held it close against her coat. Reeves noticed the way every federal agent treated her. Not as a suspect. Not even as a witness. There was respect there. Genuine respect. That realization unsettled him more than anything else. Hale motioned toward the building behind them. We are already 40 minutes behind schedule. Naomi gave a small nod. Traffic was not the reason. Several agents exchanged knowing looks. Reeves felt his stomach tighten. Can somebody tell me what is going on? He asked. Hale turned toward him. You believe this morning started when you saw a woman standing near federal property. His voice remained calm. For us, this started 11 months ago. Reeves frowned. 11 months. The number sounded strangely specific. Hale continued. 11 months of reports. 11 months of interviews. 11 months of evidence collection. Naomi lowered her eyes briefly. Rainwater rolled from the edge of her sleeve. And 11 months of people taking risks to tell the truth, she added quietly. Reeves suddenly became aware that several agents were watching his reaction more closely than his words. It felt less like a conversation and more like an evaluation. Across the plaza, government employees gathered behind large glass windows, trying to understand what was happening outside. The scene no longer looked like a routine detention. It looked like something far bigger. Hale reached into his coat and removed a thin folder. The pages inside were protected by clear sleeves. He held it carefully. This is why she is here. Reeves glanced at the folder. What is it? Evidence. The single word landed heavily. Evidence connected to an ongoing federal investigation. Naomi finally spoke again. People trusted me with information because they were afraid nobody else would listen. Her voice was calm, but there was weight behind every word. Some of them spent years waiting for someone to believe them. Reeves stared at her. For the first time, he realized that he had never truly looked at the woman he arrested. He had made assumptions within seconds of seeing her. Assumptions that now felt impossible to defend. A cold gust of wind swept through the plaza. Hale closed the folder. Officer Reeves, today was supposed to be about protecting someone brave enough to come forward. He paused. Instead, she arrived in handcuffs. Silence followed. Heavy silence. The kind that forces people to confront truths they would rather avoid. Then Hale looked toward the federal building entrance and nodded. Let us finish what she came here to do. The glass doors opened automatically as Naomi Carter stepped toward the entrance, but the atmosphere inside the building felt nothing like the storm she had just left behind. The lobby was quiet, polished, and bright, its marble floors reflecting rows of recessed lights overhead. Federal employees moved through security checkpoints carrying folders and laptops, yet many slowed when they noticed Agent Marcus Hale walking beside her. Whatever meeting had been delayed that morning was clearly important. Naomi could feel it in the hurried footsteps, the whispered conversations, and the way people glanced toward the slim leather bag she carried. Inside one of the elevators, nobody spoke. The ride to the 7th floor lasted less than a minute, but for Daniel Reeves, who remained downstairs beneath the watchful eyes of federal personnel, it probably felt much longer. Naomi thought about that as the elevator doors opened. She had no desire to humiliate anyone. She never had. The purpose of her work had always been the truth. Nothing more. Nothing less. The conference room waiting at the end of the hallway was larger than she expected. A long table stretched across the center beneath soft, overhead lighting. Several agents were already seated. Others stood near screens displaying maps, timelines, and case files. The moment Naomi entered, the room became still. Not because she held authority over them. Not because she demanded attention, but because everyone understood what she had spent the last 11 months doing. Agent Hale pulled out a chair. You made it. Naomi allowed herself a faint smile. Barely. A few agents exchanged knowing looks. One woman near the end of the table shook her head. We saw the security footage. Another added quietly. You should not have had to go through that. Naomi placed her bag on the table and carefully opened it. Inside sat a blue document envelope protected from the rain. For a moment, nobody moved. The envelope looked ordinary, yet everyone in the room understood its significance. Months of interviews, hundreds of pages, statements from people who had spent years believing nobody would listen. Naomi rested her hand on top of the envelope. Her thoughts drifted backward through nearly a year of travel, phone calls, late nights, and difficult conversations. She remembered frightened voices asking whether their names would remain protected. She remembered retired officers who spoke only after ensuring the doors were locked. She remembered families who carried disappointment for years because they felt invisible inside a system that was supposed to serve them. The stories were different. The details varied. But one theme appeared again and again. People wanted accountability. They wanted fairness. They wanted someone willing to listen without deciding their worth beforehand. Agent Hale took a seat beside her. Whenever you are ready. Naomi nodded slowly. Then she opened the envelope. The room remained silent as the first documents appeared. Pages, photographs, timelines, internal communications. Every piece arranged with meticulous care. Nobody interrupted. Nobody checked a phone. Nobody looked away. Outside the conference room windows, the rain continued falling across Washington, but inside, something far more powerful had begun. The truth was finally entering the record, and once it did, there would be no way to pretend it had never existed. For the next 2 hours, the conference room remained locked in absolute concentration. The stack of documents seemed endless. Every page Naomi Carter placed on the table connected to another piece of a much larger picture. Names appeared repeatedly. Dates aligned. Internal complaints that had once seemed isolated suddenly formed patterns when viewed together. Agent Marcus Hale stood near one of the display screens while analysts organized timelines across digital boards. Nobody rushed. Nobody interrupted. They understood the significance of getting every detail right. Naomi watched as years of overlooked concerns slowly transformed into a clear record. There was no dramatic revelation. No single page that changed everything. The power came from consistency. One account became 10. 10 became 50. Small details gathered strength because they matched each other. Imagine spending years believing your voice did not matter, only to discover someone had been listening the entire time. That was what sat inside the blue envelope. Not accusations. Not rumors. Testimony. Documentation. Facts. Across the table, a senior analyst adjusted her glasses and reviewed another file. This statement matches one we received 8 months ago. An investigator nearby nodded. Different city. Same circumstances. Another agent highlighted dates on a screen. And the timelines overlap. The room grew quieter. The evidence was speaking for itself. Naomi leaned back slightly in her chair. Exhaustion settled into her shoulders. 11 months was a long time to carry responsibility that heavy. There had been nights when she questioned whether the effort would matter. Nights when sources stopped answering calls. Nights when confidential meetings were canceled at the last minute because people became afraid. Fear had followed the investigation everywhere. Yet so had courage. She remembered a retired clerk who drove nearly 300 miles to provide records she had protected for years. She remembered a young employee who risked her career simply by telling the truth. She remembered parents who shared painful experiences because they wanted future generations treated differently. Those memories stayed with her now as the investigation reached a turning point. Agent Hale eventually closed one of the folders and looked toward Naomi. "You knew this was larger than most people realized." Naomi nodded. "I suspected it. And now?" She glanced around the room. "Now I know." Nobody smiled. The moment was too serious for celebration. Outside the 7th-floor windows, the rain finally began to ease. Gray clouds drifted slowly above the city skyline. Sunlight attempted to break through for the first time all morning. Down on the streets below, life continued as normal. People walked to lunch. Traffic lights changed. Buses moved through crowded intersections. Most of the city had no idea what was unfolding inside the federal building. But that was often how change began. Quietly, behind closed doors. One verified fact at a time. Then an agent entered the room carrying a tablet. His expression immediately caught Hale's attention. "Sir," he said carefully, "you need to see this." The room fell silent again. Hale accepted the device and studied the screen. His jaw tightened slightly. Naomi noticed the change instantly. "What happened?" she asked. Hale looked up. "The security footage from this morning has already reached the media." Every conversation stopped. Every eye turned toward him. Then he added 6 words that changed the atmosphere completely. "And the public is asking questions." The tablet moved from one agent to another as the reality of the situation settled across the room. What had happened outside the federal building only hours earlier was no longer a private incident. It had become a public conversation. Agent Marcus Hale placed the device on the conference table and enlarged the footage on the screen at the front of the room. The video showed rain falling across the plaza. It showed Naomi Carter standing calmly on the steps. It showed the crowd gathering. It showed questions being asked. Thousands of people had already watched it. Thousands more were sharing it every minute. The comments scrolling beneath the footage reflected something deeper than curiosity. People wanted answers. They wanted context. They wanted to know why a woman carrying federal documents had been treated as though she did not belong there. Naomi sat quietly as headlines began appearing across multiple news sites. Some focused on the detention itself. Others focused on the federal investigation now connected to it. The story was growing faster than anyone expected. One analyst leaned forward in his chair. "The footage is being replayed nationally." Another agent checked incoming reports on her laptop. Several advocacy groups have already issued statements. Hale folded his arms. The attention is not the problem. Everyone looked at him. The problem is that attention attracts scrutiny. Naomi understood immediately. Scrutiny worked both ways. It would examine the actions of Officer Daniel Reeves. But it would also examine every detail of the investigation she had spent 11 months building. Every document would need to withstand public examination. Every fact would need to remain solid. Every timeline would need to be verified. The burden of truth had just become heavier. Across town, Daniel Reeves sat alone inside a small administrative office. The confidence he once carried felt very far away. His radio had been collected temporarily. His supervisors had instructed him to remain available while questions were reviewed. Through the office window, he watched co-workers moving through the hallway. Some avoided eye contact. Others glanced toward him before quickly looking away. For the first time all day, Reeves replayed the morning in his mind without defending himself. He remembered Naomi standing in the rain. He remembered her calm voice. He remembered the moment she asked him to call Agent Hale. At the time, he had dismissed it without a second thought. Now that decision echoed louder than anything else. Back at the federal building, sunlight finally pushed through gaps in the clouds. Golden reflections stretched across the conference room windows. The storm that had dominated the morning was fading. Naomi gathered several remaining documents and slid them across the table. "There is one more section you need to review." Hale opened the folder. Inside were records nobody else in the room had seen before. The atmosphere changed immediately. Analysts exchanged surprised looks. An investigator slowly lowered his pen. Hale read several pages in silence before lifting his eyes toward Naomi. "You never mentioned these." Naomi took a slow breath. "Because I needed proof before I brought them forward." The room became perfectly still. Hale looked back at the documents. Then he spoke words that sent a chill through everyone present. "If this information checks out, the investigation is far bigger than we thought." The room remained silent long after Agent Marcus Hale finished reading the documents. Nobody reached for a phone. Nobody spoke above a whisper. The information Naomi Carter had protected was not simply another layer of evidence. It connected people, departments, and decisions that had previously appeared unrelated. What everyone once believed were isolated incidents now resembled pieces of the same puzzle. Hale placed the final page on the table and looked around the room. "We verify everything," he said. "Every date, every signature, every communication." Several agents immediately began working. Laptops opened. Calls were placed. Databases were searched. The energy inside the conference room shifted from curiosity to urgency. Naomi watched quietly. For months, she had lived with the weight of these records. She had reviewed them countless times, afraid she might overlook a detail that could change everything. Yet the more she examined them, the clearer the pattern became. Truth had a way of connecting itself. Hours passed. Sunlight gradually replaced the gray skies outside. Washington looked different now. Cleaner, brighter, as if the city itself had exhaled after the storm. Then the confirmations began arriving. One analyst verified a chain of communications. Another matched archived reports to statements collected months apart. A third uncovered records that strengthened Naomi's findings even further. Each confirmation added another layer of credibility. Each verified detail made the investigation harder to ignore. Across the room, an investigator slowly leaned back in his chair. "It all lines up." Nobody celebrated. The realization was too serious for that. Agent Hale walked toward the windows overlooking the city. "How many people knew?" he asked. Naomi thought carefully before answering. "Enough to suspect something was wrong. Not enough to prove it." Hale nodded. He understood the difference. Suspicion could be dismissed. Proof could not. At nearly the same moment, Daniel Reeves sat in the administrative office staring at a television mounted in the corner of the room. News anchors were discussing the footage from the Federal Plaza. Legal experts debated procedures. Community leaders discussed accountability. The story was no longer about a single misunderstanding. It had become a conversation about assumptions, fairness, and the responsibility that comes with authority. Reeves listened quietly. For the first time in years, he found himself questioning decisions he had never examined before. Back at the federal building, a young analyst hurried into the conference room carrying a printed report. "We have independent verification." Every head turned. The analyst placed the report in front of Hale. 3 separate sources confirmed the same findings within the last hour. Hale reviewed the pages carefully. Then he looked toward Naomi. His expression revealed something she had not seen all day. Relief. Genuine relief. "You did it," he said softly. Naomi lowered her eyes for a moment. She thought about every person who trusted her with their stories. Every difficult conversation. Every risk. Every late night. The journey had never been about recognition. It had been about being heard. Hale closed the report and spoke words nobody in the room would forget. "Tomorrow morning, this investigation moves into the next phase." The next morning arrived with an unusual sense of anticipation. Long before sunrise, lights were already glowing inside federal offices across Washington. Analysts reviewed reports one final time. Attorneys examined documentation. Investigators confirmed timelines that had taken months to assemble. The next phase was no longer a possibility. It was happening. Naomi Carter stood beside a large window overlooking the city as dawn painted the horizon in shades of gold and pale blue. The streets below slowly filled with commuters beginning another ordinary day. Most of them had no idea that decisions made within the next few hours could affect institutions far beyond the Capitol. Agent Marcus Hale entered the room carrying a folder marked for executive review. His expression was focused but calmer than it had been the day before. "The verification team completed their work overnight," he said. Naomi turned toward him, and Hale placed the folder on the table. Every major finding held up under review. For a moment, neither of them spoke. 11 months of effort. Thousands of pages. Countless interviews. Every sacrifice now rested on the strength of facts that had survived scrutiny. Around them, teams moved through hallways with quiet purpose. Conference rooms filled with specialists. Secure calls connected offices across multiple states. The investigation had grown beyond a single building and beyond a single city. What once began as isolated concerns had become a coordinated effort to understand a much larger problem. Meanwhile, public interest continued to grow. News organizations followed every development. Commentators debated accountability and responsibility. Community leaders called for transparency. Social media remained flooded with discussion about the footage from the Federal Plaza. Yet something interesting had begun to happen. The conversation was no longer centered solely on Naomi. People were asking broader questions. Questions about fairness. Questions about assumptions. Questions about how easily someone could be judged before their story was known. Across town, Daniel Reeves sat inside a meeting room with department officials. The atmosphere was professional but serious. Nobody raised their voice. Nobody rushed to conclusions. The review process was moving forward exactly as it should. Reeves listened carefully as procedures were discussed and timelines examined. The experience felt different from anything he had faced before. For years, he believed confidence alone was enough to guide decisions. Now he understood something more difficult. Confidence without understanding could lead people in the wrong direction. Back at the federal building, Naomi entered another conference room where senior officials had gathered. Large screens displayed summaries of verified findings. Charts connected information collected across multiple jurisdictions. The scale of the investigation was impossible to ignore now. One official reviewed the material quietly before setting down his pen. "This is one of the most thoroughly documented cases I have seen in years." Another nodded. And it began because somebody refused to look away. Their attention shifted toward Naomi. She felt uncomfortable being the focus. The work had never been about recognition. Many people contributed to reaching this moment. Many voices deserved to be heard. Hale seemed to understand exactly what she was thinking. The documents mattered, he said. But the courage behind them mattered even more. Silence settled across the room. Not awkward silence. Respectful silence. The kind that appears when people recognize the significance of what stands before them. Then the lead official closed the final folder and delivered the words everyone had been waiting to hear. Proceed with full implementation. The weeks that followed changed more than anyone expected. What began as a rainy morning outside a federal building evolved into a national conversation about responsibility, dignity, and the importance of listening before judging. Reviews moved forward. Policies were examined. Procedures were updated. Leaders who once overlooked certain concerns now paid closer attention. The investigation continued through official channels, supported by evidence that had survived every challenge placed before it. For Naomi Carter, the attention never felt comfortable. She had spent months working quietly, never seeking recognition, never imagining her name would appear in news reports across the country. Yet wherever she went, people seemed to know the story. Some recognized her from the footage. Others knew her because of the investigation. Many simply wanted to thank her. One afternoon, several weeks after the federal review began, Naomi walked through a neighborhood park on the edge of the city. Spring had finally arrived. Children laughed near a playground. Families gathered beneath flowering trees. The air felt lighter than it had in a very long time. She sat on a bench and watched the sunlight dance across a small pond. For the first time in nearly a year, she allowed herself to rest. Her phone buzzed softly. A message from Agent Marcus Hale appeared on the screen. The final implementation report had been approved. Additional oversight measures were moving forward. Recommendations from the investigation would become part of future policy. Naomi read the message twice before smiling quietly. It was not victory she felt. It was peace. The kind of peace that comes from knowing the truth had finally found its place. Across town, Daniel Reeves was living through his own period of reflection. The events of that rainy morning remained impossible to forget. Over time, he came to understand that authority alone did not make someone right. Experience alone did not remove the need for humility. The hardest lessons are often the ones that force people to confront themselves. Sometimes growth begins the moment certainty ends. Back at the park, Naomi noticed an elderly woman struggling to carry several bags from a nearby market. Without hesitation, she stood and offered help. The woman thanked her warmly. Neither recognized the other. Neither knew anything about investigations, headlines, or federal reports. For a few minutes, they simply walked together beneath the trees. Naomi liked that. Real life rarely felt as dramatic as the stories people told afterward. Most meaningful change happened through ordinary moments. Small acts, quiet courage, honest conversations. As the sun slowly lowered across the horizon, Naomi paused near the water and looked out across the city skyline. The buildings glowed gold beneath the evening light. Somewhere beyond them stood the same federal plaza where everything had changed. The same stone steps, the same doors, the same place where someone once looked at her and decided she did not belong. She thought about that moment for a second and then let it go. Because the truth had never depended on who believed it first. It only needed the chance to be seen. And in the end, the door she was told did not belong to her had opened anyway. Not because of power, not because of status, but because truth has a way of reaching places that prejudice never can. He believed he was protecting the entrance. She was carrying the future. And when the truth finally arrived, everyone learned the difference.